continue today with learning history, real American history, with our partners at Hillsdale College. The series we are sharing with you this week, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope. It's available free online. It's a great story to share. Central to the story is one man that a developing nation turned to over and over again to face long odds and overcome nearly impossible challenges. We could use a man like this today. His name? George Washington. He overcame obstacles to rise up against the greatest army from the most powerful empire in the world and set a nation free. The renowned historian Wilfred McClay continues his lessons this week with the George Washington factor.
An incalculable advantage that the Americans had, I can express in two words: George Washington. Declaring independence was the easy part. Defeating the mightiest military power in the world, that was another matter. The United States, such as they were, the disunited United States, went into this conflict with huge and fairly obvious disadvantages. But all was not lost, because the Americans did enjoy certain very real advantages. For one thing, they had only to play defense. They needed not to win every battle. They needed not to win any battles, so long as they were able to keep the war going long enough to exhaust the patience and willingness to fight of the British opponent. Another advantage, an incalculable advantage that the Americans had, I can express in two words: George Washington. They had the person of George Washington, a man of such fine and admired, widely, universally admired character, and military skills, political savvy. He commanded the loyalty of nearly all Americans, and thus served as a unifying force when he was made commander-in-chief of the Revolutionary American Forces. He signaled his willingness to play this role by appearing at the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia wearing his military uniform. So he was ready to play. And from June 1775 on was commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. He received the position and accepted it on the condition that he received no pay for it. That was the kind of guy George Washington was. He was charismatic, courageous, selfless, tireless. He was not a world-class intellect like Jefferson, but he was always learning and had a great deal of practical and prudential wisdom. The greatest challenge that Washington would face was simply one of recruiting and holding together a credible army. This was not an easy job. There was a sense of fragility about the whole enterprise, so that the morale and willingness to serve of soldiers waxed and waned depending on circumstances in the field and weather conditions, which were very important in the American Revolution. In August of 1776, not long after the Declaration, he had 28,000 men under his command. By December, that number had shrunk to 3,000. What had happened was that his troops had been driven from New York City, by British regulars back and back and back until they ended up in Pennsylvania. The army's morale was bad. It was always unstable. It was always hostage to events, to successive peaks and valleys and consequent hope and despair, depending on how the war effort was going. Washington, through all of this, had to keep a cool head. He had to not be too influenced either by the giddiness of success or the despondency of failure. As it turned out, that winter, 1776 to 77, was an exceptionally bad winter, and it made for a gloomy time of discouragement. Fortunately for the Patriot cause, Tom Paine chose at that time to write yet another contribution to the war effort, a series of pamphlets called The American Crisis, which the most famous lines from that, which some of you may have heard, go like this at the beginning. He says, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman." Yes, he conceded that things looked very bad, but the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Paine put it just the way Washington would have liked to have been able to. And George Washington ordered that Paine's words from the American crisis be read to his troops who were suffering through this bitter winter. And they had the desired effect of rousing them to a new burst of fighting spirit. And then on Christmas night of 1776, Washington struck back. He led a force through snow and sleet across the Delaware River. You've all seen the painting of that, which is not exactly historically accurate, but who cares? It's a beautiful painting. And he surprised at dawn a sleeping force of Hessians, the hated Hessians, at Trenton in New Jersey. A week later, his forces had a similar triumph at Princeton. 2 small victories, but reason for hope. They could be auguries of good things to come. It appeared the American forces would not be defeated quickly, as the British had hoped.
By the way, it is the Great American Story, A Land of Hope from Hillsdale College. You can have it for free for yourself, for your kids, for your grandkids. Very simple. Go to Gruber for Hillsdale.com. Gruber, F-O-R, Hillsdale.com. Gruber for Hillsdale.com. You can sign up for free. This is just one excerpt from the Great American Story, A Land of Hope from our good friends at Hillsdale. We need more American heroes and real American history. We'll be right back.